Hi, good evening, everyone. This is part two of our series, and I planned it sequentially like this. So last time we talked about tweens and teens, the adolescent phase, how it works, why it works. It's really part one to prepare for really a real serious discussion about technology, and many of the things that we spoke about in the first part are really relevant for tonight. If anybody's watching, it's available either on Facebook or will be on YouTube. Have a look at the first part. This series is sponsored by my dear friends Michael and Estelle Stein in memory of their parents, Mordechai Menachem ben R Zev, Batsheva bas R Moshe, Ephraim ben Rabbi Shmuel Dovid. Should be a zechus for the neshamas. Michael's been asking me to do this for a very long time, to see that you young folks have tools to deal with raising today's children. Apple had a series of ads before I'm dating myself again. And if you remember that, think different. It was a grammatically incorrect ad when they first started with the Mac, and just encouraging people to think differently, about technology and about everything. So I'm going to encourage you to think different. I'm not going to say anything radical, but I'm really going to encourage you to think differently about this entire issue of technology, and to really step back and look at it in the broader sense of chinuch and our Messiah, our tradition. I'm going to start with some practical questions. The first talk, I always do this. I do theory first, then practice, because my experience is that if you're only given, if we only talk about practice, if we only talk about practical applications without going through the theory behind it, so you get an answer to two questions, but it really doesn't leave you with the tools to do it yourself. So I'm a big believer in theory and then practice. So meaning some ideas and then talk about how it applies. But here I'm going to I said I would do different. So if you look at the top of your handout, there are 4 practical questions that we're going to start with, which I'm going to address later after we do the theory part. So question number 1, again, these are the most popular questions that folks like me get from folks like you about the whole technology piece. Okay, our 7, 11, 15-year-old wants A or N, just fill in the blank, whatever tool there is related to technology with internet access. What should we do? Number 2, how should I respond to but everyone else has it? What's the proper response for a parent when a child says, hey, everybody else has got it? Come on, you're the only ones. I feel like a loser. I'm the only one in school who doesn't have this. What is your response? Is it a fair comment to make? And how should you respond to that? Number 3, should I check up? I wrote in parentheses snoop, because that's really what it is. Should I snoop on our son, daughters, emails, texts, social media? Should I be checking on our child does have technology devices, smartphone. Should we be snooping on it? Should I grab the phone every once in a while and see what's going on to make sure that my kid's not getting into trouble? And number 4, you might find, we don't agree with our school's technology policy. The school has a certain philosophy. Simcha, I'm glad you like that one. What a shocker. The school has a certain technology policy. We don't agree with it. We think it's not practical, it's too strict, maybe too liberal. What do you do, and what do we tell our children? And as I said, we're going to do some theory, and then I'm going to get to really discussing all of these questions and more. And then like we did 2 nights ago, I really would like to open up to questions because it's really important. So as you see from the title, this has been my philosophy since Al Gore invented the internet. I had a very consistent policy all along that computers should be in a public area with parental supervision, and I always felt that this is the way to go. Postpone as long as you can. Protect, supervise, watch, make sure while your children are starting to use technology to protect them. And it's beguf and nefesh. It's physically from harm, from cyberbullying, from predators who prey online, to protect your children from posting things that could harm them and stick with them for a very long time, and spiritually. So it's both, beguf and nefesh, physically and spiritually, to protect them by using whatever filters there are or other things like that. But it's much more than filters. It's about being engaged, understanding technology yourself, and supervising them. But and here's where I wrote about the differently thing. Lani is daiti. I've always felt this way, that not enough time is spent on the third part. And that's where I'm going to be spending most of our time, talking about the third part, which is prepare. And I don't think it's being talked about enough, and I think that's really where the action is. And by prepare, I mean, how are you preparing your child to make good choices when you're not around to supervise them, either because they're away, or because they're doing stuff behind your back, or because they're just children and they explore and experiment. And here's the first question. Again, I'm working my way through the handout here. And here's what I would really encourage you to think about, okay? And the question is, how can you prepare your 15-year-old daughter to make good choices during the gap year, her post-high school year in Eretz Yisrael? Okay? So imagine that you have a 9th or 10th, let's say a 10th grader, and she is your third daughter, and you've had the zechus to send, the privilege of sending your daughters to Eretz Yisrael, to Israel for the gap year, for the year after high school. And you know that you did your homework and you looked for a school that had good supervision, and it's very important that you do, and I really encourage you to go to Eretz Yisrael before you send your children there. You're investing so much money, you take another flight, and really check what's going on and supervise them. It's important that they have supervision. Just parenthetically, anybody can I give you a tip for the best advice to check out the schools, who has good supervision, who doesn't? Every time you get into an Israeli cab, take your list of 5 schools you're considering and ask the cab drivers which of the seminaries supervise the kids the best, or yeshivas. It's hysterical and it's fantastic. They know everything, because the kids who are busting curfew, they get into the car. The ones that have serious strict schools, they get it, here, I'll give you an extra 200 shekel, get me there before 12 o'clock, And the other ones, they know who, they drive up to the schools at 4 in the morning. So just a piece of advice. So you should check. But if you've had children in Eretz Yisrael and it's not your first child, you know that a kid can get into trouble no matter what, the best school in the world with the greatest supervision. If the kids want to get into trouble, they're going to get into trouble. So here's your question. You have a sheltered, wonderful young lady who's in school and doing well. And now, because you've done this, 3 years from now, she's going to be on her own. And the same goes for boys, by the way. Maybe we should talk more about the boys, but let's just leave it at the girls, okay? So what do you do about it now? And if all you're doing, and here's the analogy to technology, if all you're doing is telling your daughter, you can't go here, and you can't go here, and you can't go there, which you should do, again, there's the balance, but you're not preparing her to make good choices, and if she has no privileges outside the house, and she's completely sheltered, and isn't allowed to drive anywhere or go anywhere by herself. I'm taking an extreme example. But if her experiences are such, how in the world should she have this practice? How in the world should that muscle be of making good choices be exercised until then? You really haven't had any serious discussions with her about this, because the first time she'll be making choices is in Eretz Yisrael, and you're not there. So that's the prepare part. It's much harder, and I think it's the most important. So we're going to talk about all of them. So let me start from postponing. Again, with your permission, I'm going to get through first and then take questions. Please jot down if you have anything. I'll make a deal. I used to do this with my 8th grade students for over many years. They had the zechus to teach 8th grade for 15 years. If I told my students, if there was something they didn't understand, that means I didn't explain it well enough, you're allowed to interrupt me in the middle of a sentence. If it's a what if, wait for after shiur, after the lecture's over. So we'll do the same rules here. If you're not sure of what I said, what did you mean by that, feel free to just raise your hand and I'll take your question. If it's a what if, the kids figured out how about, all the other words for what if. But if it's a question, we'll leave it for later. If you don't understand what I'm saying, this is important stuff, so feel free to interrupt. So postpone means to delay as much as possible. And again, working our way through this, I think there is no number. There is no hard number here. I believe that stage is when he or she, as what I wrote, is inclined to and can get involved with technology without my knowledge. Ask yourself a general question. How old, the average child, excuse me, how old does a child have to, how old can a child in today's environment find technology device behind your back and do whatever they want to if they're so inclined? How old do you think the average child is? Go ahead. 6, 7? 10? Does anybody say 17? No, we don't think so, right? So you could say 6, you could say 8, you could say 10. It's not 17. So if you accept my premise, and you don't have to, you feel free to disagree. But if you accept my thought that at a time when your children are able and inclined to find this stuff without your permission and do it behind your back, that is the time when you should start thinking about having them start or allow them to start. It doesn't mean that you initiate it, but when they come to you, allow them to start this technology use in front of you. And again, there are so many variables. It depends on, I wrote it on the bottom, the third one. At that time, somebody please, the timing depends on where you live, what the community norms are in terms of technology, and they vary very much. Even within our own Orthodox community, there is a wide range of depending on the neighborhood, when parents would consider it appropriate for children to start technology. It's the peer group of the children, what the friends are doing, and that does make a big difference. That was one of the questions, if you said everyone has it, and their nature. And if you have a compliant child who follows the rules and does what they're told, you can get away with it till 18 years old. You're fine. Then that number that you said 6 is really 18, because you say, we don't do... Anybody know my brother, Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Horowitz, he's a mashgiach in Mesivta Teres Yakov in the 5 towns. He lives here in Kensington. You don't know. I have a brother who's tzaddik. He's 2 years younger than I am. He's a kid. You can get away till 20 years old. He really is an extreme, it's a zechus. I always tell me I have better yichus than he does because I have him for a brother. So he was always, from the time he was born, he's 2 years younger than I am, he was always a rule follower, and I was a rule breaker since the moment I was born. So if you have a Rabbi Yehuda, you're fine. You can go home now. All the kids are like that. If you have a Yankee, start thinking about it, folks. And most of us have some children that are rule followers and some children that are rule breakers. So all of this, there isn't one rule. And I propose to you that your children, it's the second bullet point in this series here, in this part, I believe that the children would like to be able to follow your house rules. When do they stop? Once they realize that they're not going to get permission. So they try it once, they ask twice, they ask 3 times, maybe 10 times. Sooner or later, sooner or later they realize that they're not going to get permission. And at that point, many of them, again, depending on the 1 to 10, how much of a rule breaker they are, sooner or later they're going to just figure out that I may as well try. If I get caught, I get caught. One of my close friends, I thought it was a good line, but one of my close friends got sent out of yeshiva for 2 weeks. In my days, they didn't use politically correct terms for sending kids out of yeshiva. He was sent away from school for 2 weeks because he did something wrong, and the Rosh Yeshiva asked him, why did you do this? And he said, hey, look, Rebbe, one thing I found out about this place It's much easier to ask for mechila than to get reshus. The kid said, I thought it was a good line. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than to get permission. He was right. The kid was right. So this is what happens. They ask, they ask, they ask. Sooner or later, there comes a point that they're going to wing it and take their chances. And then you have that. This is the point now. And then you have no control at all. Your child is not being parented when they need it the most. So postpone as long as you can. Again, there's no fast rule, but this is what I would say is something to start thinking about. Protect, supervise. One way I found it helpful to discuss it with children is to speak to them about driving an automobile, driving a car, and explain to them that there will be a time that they can drive by themselves. There's a time now that they can't drive at all, and it will come in phases over the course of time. You know, so you can drive, then you drive on, you know, you drive in a parking lot, then you go to get a permit, so you explain that it's going to come like that, and that's the time when you protect them. The kids are not equipped to protect themselves, and the nature of technology also is that it's 0 to 120, literally in a second. In my days, if somebody wanted to get into trouble or find inappropriate content and stuff, like it took a long time. First of all, you know, challenges are always the same. In other words, there are challenges. There are challenges in every generation. What changes is that the Yetzer Hara makes house calls. That's really you know, he got better. There's more, you know, he's got better tools and he makes house calls. So the stuff comes to them. But in a second, a child can be on the most horrible side, and physically, spiritually, in a second. And they're just not prepared to deal with it. So, you know, my advice to you all is get with the program, guys. Make sure you understand what's going on. Make sure you understand today's technology. How many of you think that if you have a 15-year-old, or if you would have a 15-year-old, how many of you feel that 15-year-olds know more about technology than you do? Hands up. Got about 50% with their hands up and 20% like this. Okay? So most of us feel that 15-year-olds know more about technology than we do. So how in the world can you supervise somebody who knows more than you do? So you got to learn. So if you're my age, if you're Michael's age, you could be clueless. It's fine. And you could say things like, well, nobody talks today, texting, schmexting. You know, say stuff like that, which basically hangs a sign on your forehead. I don't get it. I don't understand your life. Don't bother talking to me about anything. But if you got kids, really, folks, you gotta know what's going on. I think your next talk after this, bring somebody in who's real maven on technology and tell them to give you a talk about it. I had the most adorable idea. I proposed it to a number of communities. One of them actually did it. If you want to be the second, I would encourage you to do it. It was a brilliant, I'm sorry, it was my idea. It wasn't that brilliant. It was a nice idea. But I told them they should outsource. Parents came to me after one of these classes and said, what should we do? You said we don't know, the kids know more than we do. What are we supposed to do? So I said, why don't you outsource it? I asked them, who here knows technology the best? Everybody pointed to one person. That's what he does for a living. So I said, tell your kids, you can have a smartphone. I'm paying him $10 a month to supervise you. And the kids went nuts because they couldn't mess with this guy. He knew more than they did. It's not a bad idea. Outsource it. Think about it. But whatever it is, make sure that you understand what's going on. And I said, get professional advice. And let me talk about preparing, because that's really, these two are relatively simple. I would hope they're obvious, although my experience has proven that it's not always obvious. So certainly postpone as long as you can. Certainly protect them. Let's talk about preparing. And my number one recommendation for a parenting book, if you want to follow up on this talk and Monday's talk and this talk, and really follow up, I would encourage you to, my number one recommendation for a book is Rav Shlomo Vol Bezriya Ubinyan B'Chinuch. It's in English. It's a very small book. It's a little green paper, it's not paperback, it's a small book. You can read it, you can probably read it in an hour. It's called Planting and Building, but it's not something you read. You have to really study it. You have to get your hands around what he's saying. And he basically says, and this is going to be a theme for the rest of the talk, Rav Wolbe says that there are two types of growth. You can plant or you can build. Building is an inorganic type of growth, where you stack up bricks or stones, and that's it, you got a wall. I'm not going to say anything about the wall in Mexico, who's going to pay for it. Okay, so you just stack up bricks, and after a while you have a wall. Or you could plant things, and after a while you have trees or a vineyard or an orchard. So Rav Wolbe says there's a fascinating difference between the two. First of all, building is much easier. The bricks don't move much. You don't have to weed, you don't have to water, it doesn't take that long. You see success right away. You see immediate success. The problem is, as Rav Wolbe brilliantly points out, he has a lot of Mamare Chazal and proof from Kriya Shema, from a lot of other psukim. I'm not going there at all. The problem with building is the second you put that last brick down, that's the last second that anything's ever going to grow there. You're not going to come back a week from now and find more bricks there. Whatever you did, and that's it. When you stop working, it's over. Whereas planting, it's messy, it doesn't always work the way you want it to. There's weeds grow, you have to tend it, you have to water, you have to watch. The beauty is when you're done, you sit back and it's done, and it grows by itself. And Rav Wolbe says, one of the folks here was, I don't think he's here tonight, one of the folks was mentioning, one of you guys was mentioning about, how they got a frask, a patch, or when he was raised in an authoritarian way, as many people in my generation especially were. That's a building thing. Rav Wolbe would say that's building. When you tell children, you have to do this because I said so, that's building. As long as you're bigger and stronger and you get to make the rules, they'll do exactly what you say. They'll be very orderly. Why do people patch their kids? Why do people hit their kids? Because it works short term. The damage is incalculable long term, and it's destructive because Rav Wolbe writes in a sefer that when children are hit, they think to themselves, I can't wait to get even with you. Rav Wolbe says every child that was patched patches back in different ways. They don't smack, they do other things when they grow older. But short term, it's much more effective than talking and reasoning and arguing. The problem is you haven't accomplished anything. You've accomplished short term. Quite to the contrary, you've taught your kids that ruling by force works. We'll discuss that at a later time. Most of us came out okay. Well, I'll be glad to take that during Q&A. Now, by the way, just for the record, parenthetically, Rav Wolbe says he does not say it about corporal punishment, but he does say that there are times that you need building stuff. You can't sit and reason with a 3-year-old child why they shouldn't cross the street. And there are times, I mentioned the last talk, there are times when you have to tell your children, no, you can't do it because I said so. But don't fool yourself into thinking that's a long-term. That's a short-term solution, which you may need. So that's Rav Wolbe's general idea, that there's planting and there's building. And I think if there was any generation and there was any time, a set of circumstances where the building thing was, the planting thing was needed, it's our generation and dealing with the children today. I have 3 articles that I wrote on this. I wrote you the headings, Walmart is coming, educated consumers, and Rambam arrived. I wrote actually about 8 or 10 articles on the internet about 10 years ago in Mishpacha magazine. If you Google just Yakov Horowitz and any of these titles, they'll come up. I compared it at the time. Again, this was before, they didn't have DSL lines. They had these squeaky, remember those guys? You click the thing in, you had the squeaky startup thing. And at that time, it really was easy to do the building thing. There wasn't Wi-Fi and there wasn't any of that stuff. It was easy to say, no, you can't have it. But, so I compared it to Walmart. And that's really my philosophy. I wrote, Walmart is coming was my first article in Mishpacha about technology. And I wrote, take an example of a small little town that has these mom and pop shops. And now they found out that Walmart's moving down 10 miles down the road. And there are a lot of books written, some fascinating books written about what happens when Walmart's move into communities. And the research clearly indicates, there were studies done, that when people are unrealistic and they say, nah, it's not going to come, we'll fight it, we'll this, we'll that, or they give up. Or, if you look at, I compared it to the grieving cycles. There are 5 stages of grieving, denial, bargaining, and those cities got decimated When Walmart did move in, the mom and pop stores basically all closed down, and the downtown became a ghost town. Whereas the folks who planned, and they said, look, it might come. We'll try to fight it, but we'll try to fight the zoning or whatever, but it might come. What are we doing about it now? So the research shows, I found it fascinating as it related to this whole subject of technology. The research showed clearly that when communities got together and say, look, we got to spruce up the downtown area, the shops are worn down, there's no civic pride here, we have to pave the streets and bring in trees and start a campaign, buy local, get the shops there to sell stuff on the internet, have a crafts fair. Those towns did better than they did before. And I said, if all we're going to, I wrote the piece, if all we're going to do is say, I hope it doesn't come, I daven it doesn't come, etc., we're going to get crushed. So we should plan for it, spruce up our homes and our yeshivos, and make Yiddishkeit beautiful for the children, and have them have healthy hobbies in every which way. I think we'll be fine. I think we are fine. You said you're fine, but we need to prepare for it. So one more thought on this whole thing, and I said think differently. I'd like to talk a little bit of hashkafa, of Jewish philosophy, of thought. And here's my question, and I want to talk, it relates directly to, as I see it, what your role is with technology as it relates to your children. What you do with your 15-year-old daughter, because that's really what it's all about. It's the same idea, just with different components. Why did Hashem give us free choice? You ever wonder? If we made a board of directors for the world and we asked how to run this place, I don't think any of us would vote for free choice. Shuls don't run on free choice. Parking isn't, there's no free choice. There's no area in the world, and there's no institution in the world that runs on free choice. Now, we get punished later, but right now, a person can do, as far as God is concerned, as far as Hashem is concerned, we can do anything we want. God did not stop us from sinning. Why is that? Why did Hashem give us free choice? And here's another question. Why is it, it's something that I taught 13, 14-year-olds for many years, so I found such an interesting point in halacha, from the age of 13 to 20, exactly adolescent years, exactly what research shows to be the adolescent phase, which we spoke about 2 nights ago. There's a halacha, the Jewish law is that if a 15-year-old keys a car, if a 15, 17-year-old takes a key and scratches up 10 cars and does damage to other humans, they're responsible to pay for it. They're not considered a minor, they're considered an adult for that. And in the times of the Gemara, in the times when we had a Bezdin, when we had a rabbinic court that had teeth, they used to force the guy to work. I mean, Eved Ivri wasn't a slave, they worked like a manual laborer. They had to work and pay it back. But if it's B'dinei Shemayim, if it's something that's only a sin against God, like let's say not keeping Shabbos or something, during 13 to 20, they're Pata B'dinei Shemayim, Chayv B'dinei Adam. What's that all about? What's the logic behind that? So I'll tell you what I think. And I feel free to disagree. This is my own thought. I'll tell you what I think. I mean, I have my Mekaymis, I have references to prove it, but here's what I think. We human beings, we learn from our mistakes. Okay? Whoever figured out a way to put their car keys in a place where they won't lose them, it's not because your wife told you to do it or your mother told you to do it. It's because you lost it once and you got really messed up. You went to a bris and you left you left your talis and tefillin behind. So you figured out, you know what, I'll put my keys in the talis and tefillin and then I won't lose it, right? I lose stuff, so. So you figure out ways to do this. You don't do it because people told you or people yelled at you or people punished you. You do it because you make mistakes. And we take umbrellas out when it rains and we take winter coats out. People tell us this stuff. We learn from our mistakes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu just made us that way. And I really believe this. I believe that Hashem wanted to prepare us for Olam Haba, for the world to come. And Hashem wanted us to come to this world flawed, with all the flaws that human beings have, selfish and materialistic and prone to anger. And Hashem brought us here to this world, gave us the luxury of stepping back and allowing us to make mistakes so we would become better people. We stop, most kids who stop drinking, who are drinking heavily, most of them stop drinking when they get roaring drunk once and then sick for 2 days. That's all part of this. I really believe this. I believe Hashem puts us in this world. Like I said, we marry, men, we marry. Most of our spouses, if you invite me back one day, I'll do a talk on personality profiles. Most of us marry spouses that are exactly opposite from our nature. We have to learn to get along with somebody who's totally different. I really believe that having adolescent children is part of that. Having teenagers teaches you discipline and self-control. I've seen the most obnoxious, arrogant people brought to their knees. I'm not happy when I see it. A teenager, a little 15-year-old, can bring the most powerful, well-connected, wealthy, influential person to their knees in 5 minutes. I believe that this is part of Hashem's plan for us. If you ask me, I'll tell you Dvar Torah on that, but during Q&A. But I want to do the talk first. I think this is all part of the process. Adolescence, this is again Yankee speaking, adolescence is the time for children to make mistakes while they're in our house. So we can guide them and we can teach them to learn from their mistakes. That's how a 15-year-old girl learns to make good choices. You give them limited privileges with supervision. You watch them. Hopefully you have the type of relationship where they really talk to you even when they make mistakes, or especially when they make mistakes. And that doesn't come easy. And you have to work on that to get them to do that. But these conversations and these experiences allow people to grow. And that's what I think we really need to do with our children. Because if they do stuff behind our backs, how are they supposed to learn how to be a Torah Jew, be a Bal Yireh Shamayim that has a moral compass, if we're not guiding them? And if either one, if we don't give them any access to technology, let's say until they're 20, so they're adolescents, they start making mistakes at 20. And if we create the environment that they do it behind our backs, so they also are not getting guidance. They're getting guidance from their friends. So I really believe this is something I encourage you to think about. Think about adolescence as a time for us to help our children who have low impulse control and don't have the years that we do, to give them our life experiences, to talk to them, to listen, to be able to guide and direct them. And I think that's all part of the preparing. It's much messier than saying, no, you can't have it. And I'm telling you again, anyone who lets his child just go take technology stuff, you gotta go for a long walk and think it over. That's not the way to go. But it's about balance. And I think it's this postpone, protect, and prepare. And by preparing, it's about relationships. It's about talking to your children. It's about telling your children if something's going on in your life, I want to know, even if it's going to upset me. And I'll take your questions about this later. I want to talk about congruence and supervision, and then I'm going to answer the 4 questions and open up. I'm going to leave out the Dvar Torah Manoach. You can look it up. Rav Schwab has it's a little bit later. I want to get through the presentation. Rav Schwab has a beautiful word on Manoach and Shimshon's parents. You can look it up in Mayan Beis HaShe'eva. I had the zechus to hear it from Rav Schwab live. I taught 3 of his grandchildren. He said it at one of the children's bar mitzvah. But basically the idea is about congruence. And I think that whatever house rules you make with children, it's very confusing to them if you make rules for them that you don't keep yourself. Now, it's okay to say, I'm older, and use this analogy of driving. But I am very philosophically opposed to presenting the internet as something that's only this horrible thing, and I'm older, so I can do this horrible thing. So, like, what's the message? When you get older, you could also do this? So I think the congruence of having a set of governing principles of your home, and you have to talk about this together with your spouse, that these are the rules of the house, and this is how we do things, I often think of it like this: like imagine if you sent your kids, and imagine if you sent your kids to healthy eating classes. Let's say you wanted to be a vegetarian, or you sent your children to whatever, learn how to eat in a healthy way. Imagine if you picked them up every lesson, when the lesson was over, Sunday afternoon, you picked them up with like a dripping hot dog with all kinds of chazarai on it. And he says, hey, Dad, we're not supposed to, the teacher told us that we're not supposed to eat this. Nah, he didn't mean not to eat it. He meant not to eat a lot of it. No, he meant not. No, Dad, he said you're not supposed to eat that stuff. It's really a challenge. How could you raise your children to be careful of technology stuff when we're using it? So we have to use it responsibly and craft the message in a way that it's congruent. It is the most destructive thing for chinuch when children get cynical. The opposite of idealism is cynicism. And when children see that we have different sets of rules, it doesn't work. And I know there's a whole challenge with all of this, but we'll talk about it later. Here's my quote here. My brother, I have a brother, Rabbi Yehuda, I mentioned him earlier. He's a Rebbe, and he's a mashgiach in the 5 towns. He davens Rabbi Wilson's in Munis Yisrael in Borough Park. He does not have any technology. He has an old flip phone. He's a real tzaddik, and he lives his life like that. He raised great, normal Hasidic children that they're just great kids, and it's very congruent. The shul has a message about technology, an approach. They won't say it's terrible. They say don't use it unless you absolutely have to. That's basically my brother's philosophy. He has email that he uses in yeshiva to communicate with parents. It's a very simple message. And he and his wife, Kanei Nahar, they have a large family. The kids are all fantastically well-adjusted. No baloney, no cynicism. It's just their message in school and in shul and their home, it's exactly the same. It's a very congruent message. Don't touch technology unless you absolutely have to. What? And my home, I have a website, that doesn't fit with my life. And I didn't raise my children like that. So we raised our children with a more liberal or more, however you want to say it, a different approach to technology. So I always say you can raise Yankees kids in Yankees' home, Rabbi Yehuda's kids in Rabbi Yehuda. You can't try to raise Rabbi Yehuda's kids in Yankees' house. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And that's why my message is this whole thing with congruence is to send your children to schools that match your beliefs. And it's not what people say. I hear this all the time, and I see the results. I live in the real world, folks. I see what's going on. And when a lot of people think that it's like ice cream cones, like if you want 50 sprinkles on an ice cream cone, you take 300 of them and you pour them on, and like 50 stick and 350 go back in the bucket, and you have a great ice cream cone. So you say, I'll send them to yeshiva. Listen, the kids are always going to do a little less than the school says. I'll send them to yeshiva that has a much stricter philosophy that I don't believe in, and like something will stick. It's more than they need, but something's going to stick and it'll all be great. It's really confusing, and it leads to a lot of cynicism. So there are approaches, and I said my brother's approach is beautiful, and Tavel of Racha, that's beautiful, and there are other people that have different approaches. Wherever your family is, find a school that matches your philosophy. And what do you say if there's no schools here like that? So I'm going to end this congruence thing with a true story that happened to my wife and I. And I asked my kids' permission to repeat it. It's nothing bad, but when our daughters were in high school, the school floated a proposal that the young ladies should not drive in 11th grade. This happened to my wife and I in our own family. So the school sent a letter home to the parents that the kids in Muncie can drive at 16, which is end of 10th grade or 11th grade. And the school decided that they wanted to not allow the girls, they were thinking about making a rule that would only take effect the following year, that 11th graders could not have licenses, they could only start in 12th grade. And they asked the parents for their opinions, and they should write letters to the Hanhala, to the administration of the school. So I was extremely opposed to it, and I went in person. I wrote a letter, but I went to the principal, and I said, if you're having trouble with your 11th graders driving, it's a parenting issue. It happens to be that it's a car. It's a parenting issue. So make parenting classes and teach parents how to control 11th graders who drive. What are you accomplishing by taking their cars away? What's the point? What are you accomplishing? You're just kicking it down the road. What are you saying? So make parenting classes. Now, what do we tell our children? They know what we feel. We're not shy. So I wrote up a letter, very respectful. My wife and I wrote up a letter. We showed it to our two daughters, who were then in 8th and 10th grades. And I wrote why I'm opposed to it, and I wrote that, whatever. We told the kids, we're sending this to your principal. Just know, if the school says no, it's no. We said, listen, sweetheart, Faggy, Leah, if the school says no, it's no. And I don't care how many of your friends, some of whose parents may have said what a great idea it is, are going to allow them to do bootleg stuff, that. I said, there's no way. We're standing behind the school even though we don't agree with it. And that would be my real advice to you. That if your school does not match your philosophy, and it's not easy to, have a perfect shidduch, you got to get behind your school, and you cannot do this. It just doesn't work. Supervision, don't snoop, please. Don't ever snoop. Don't ever, by begging you, please don't ever snoop on your kids. Don't grab a phone. Don't think you're a smart aleck. Tell the children that you're supervising them. Tell them exactly what you're doing. Say, here's the rules. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have this filter or this code or this keystroke program, and we're going to check every once in a while. I reserve the right to, and I'll have this until such a time. Whatever. So tell your children what you're going to do. It's important that you do. And as I said, there's no way you should be giving a young child a technology device without making rules. But please, I'm begging you, don't go behind their back, because it's just impossible. It's impossible. It's impossible. You can't. You're eroding their trust. People feel violated when people, in my days, it was taking somebody's diary and reading it. I really dated myself. So, I mean, you cannot do this. And then you're going to go talk to them about trust. So make the rules of supervision clear and talk about trust and talk about supervision. I'm going to leave this, answer to practical questions. That last thing about third category, maybe I'll take it during Q&A. I had an adorable story, if you're interested. I had a really cute story with one of my students. Took his parents to my house for a din Torah, for a rabbinic ruling. One of my 8th graders years ago, he wanted a certain device. His parents didn't want him to have it. They were arguing about it for 2 months. Finally, the kid got frustrated, and he told his parents, he said, yeah, let's go to Rabbi Horowitz for a hearing. I thought it was pretty cool that, he was comfortable coming to me, that he would get a fair hearing. So if one of you asks during Q&A, I'll tell you what the din Torah was, and I'll tell you what I told them. I think it would be a helpful practical advice for you guys. So the answer to the questions are, my child wants a technology, internet access. I hope some of these answers are to the theory made the practice clear. They want internet access. What should we do? So I think you should really, like I said, think about how old they are. How are they ready for it? Is their nature such that they're going to get into trouble if you say no? And then think accordingly. How to respond to everyone else has it. It's a problem. I'm telling you, no matter how strongly you feel about something, if your child is in a small minority of kids who don't have a technology device in their peer group, it's a big problem. I'm not saying that you should buck to the pressure, but especially in today's world, the kids come to school and everybody's talking about, again, if they're that age, and their friends are talking about, apps and this and that, and they're sitting around, it's a very, you can do it, but it's just something to think about. It's one thing I did give advice to people, and lots of family, communities had done it. I recommended that parents of really, I would encourage you to really think about trying this, that parents of certain age groups make a WhatsApp chat group among themselves, and you guys decide when you want to give your kids. Let's say you have a 3rd grader, so make a WhatsApp group among all your friends who have 3rd grade kids, and talk among each other when you're going to decide to give the kids whatever technology access. Now, you might not all agree, but most of you will. At least you'll have some sort of of way of controlling this, because it is a problem. Snooping, I spoke about. Technology policy, I spoke about. I'll take your questions. Go, please.
How do you determine what an appropriate amount of time per day or per week for your child to have?
That's a great question. So how do you set those boundaries? So a good way to do it is try to find like try to find a logical, like we spoke about 2 nights ago, logical and something that's tied to a practical. Let's say you say a half hour before, you can only say, let's say 20 minutes before dinner, X amount of time here, at this time we take it away, whatever, you figure out a time. Basically, if it's performance-based, if you're not getting up for minyan and not getting up for school on time, if you're cranky, if you're irritable, then again, that's a good way. I said that don't take away the phone because it makes them nuts, right? Because it's the best punishment that any parent can do. But I'm saying, think about tying it to something. If you're irritable and cranky, you see, that's a good way. It's a good way to do it without, that's logical. You say, listen, if you're cranky and irritable, if you're quarreling with everybody because you're not sleeping enough because you're up late doing this stuff, I have to take it away. And we have to lower your if your grades are suffering, so, or if you're not getting fresh air. So you work out negotiate stuff. Be flexible enough to change, be open to change, listen to what they say. Sometimes you say yes, sometimes you say no. This is part of, that's what a Volvo would say is planting. That's the messy stuff. But from that emerges a kid that has a value system that you're helping them with. Did I explain myself?
Yeah. Here's my question. Do you have to be concerned about other people's reaction and the school's reaction? Is that what you have to tell your kids, that you don't do things necessarily that are logical to you, but you have to take it into consideration?
That's a good message.
Or you say you live your life.
No. So there's a balance between them. No, there's nothing wrong with saying that the community has standards, and you're part of this community. When you get married, you can find a different community that doesn't, but this is where we live, and these are the standards here, and that's fine. It's not a phony message that I'm doing, it's not only form versus substance. There's a balance. You want people to be individuals, and you want to give them the luxury of doing what they're to doing their own thing. But it's not phony if you say people dress a certain way, and therefore, again, if you have a well-adjusted child, if you have a child that's in pain and they're acting out, that's really what you need I always say, I've been saying this for about just almost 20 years, that in the extreme example, when people like abandon religion or start diminishing their religious observance, it's very important to distinguish between people who are abandoning religion and have happy, or starting, diminishing their religious observance and have happy lives, and there are many like that, and it could be for a wide variety of reasons, and people who are abandoning life. You see that they're abandoning religion, but they're really abandoning life. They're doing self-destructive things. That comes from pain. Someone who's in pain, you have to make them whole again. So it really depends why those things are being done. If it's a well-adjusted child, you have a different message. If it's a child that's doing this because they're crying out for help, nebuch, so crushing them is going to hurt them. So it really depends. One thing that's really important, and I really encourage parents and educators to do this, when children do things that have severe consequences for them, it's really not the time at that moment to talk about it. They're not ready for it. Just imagine an adult. Imagine if one of us did something at work and got fired. And we came home and we had to face our wife and children. Imagine you have grown children and you feel horrible. And imagine if your wife stopped you and said, now you see, there's a lot of important lessons to learn from this. Right? I mean, that's not the time. So when people call me and say, I'm picking up my son who was just kicked out of yeshiva for doing this and that, you say, I love you, sweetheart, nice to have you home. We have to talk sometime in the next couple of weeks. That's it. Finished. Boom. Over. And with technology, I don't know about this specific instance, but I am very often asked to help families when sometimes the young guys, especially the young ladies, they're out, I'm talking older teenagers, they're drinking or they're getting into trouble, and they post pictures of themselves, and their lives are over or very demonstrably changed. So it's a certain social responsibility to teach the children So when they do something like that, you can imagine what they feel like. It's timing is everything. So if you want to just get it off your chest, then say, I told you so, great, now what? But if you really want to help them, it's absolutely not the time. There's a guy, Dr. Eli Shapiro, by the way, has a fantastic program about digital citizenship and teaching responsibility with technology use. That's fantastic. I really would encourage you to look it up. He's a really bright, innovative person, and he's done a lot of work in the area. Yes? You asked the question. I can't believe it. Go ahead, Tim.
Let's say you do everything that you said, and you set up responsible limits, and you filters, and et cetera, and you find or catch or whatever your child's actually doing something highly inappropriate.
Right.
How do you...
So in other words, you do everything right. You have filters, you have discussions with your children, and you find them doing it right. Did they tell you, or you told them?
I'm willing to hear the answer to both.
So I think if this last thing about the third category here, that's really, that last piece is really about that. And because you asked it, I was just waiting if somebody would bring it up. If you want to do the planting thing and you want to be able to guide your children, you're really asking them to do something extraordinarily difficult, which is talk to you when they're really uncomfortable. They did something wrong. The last thing in the world they would want to do is talk to a parent. It's very embarrassing. So I would suggest, this is what we did with our children, our 5 kids growing up. We always told the kids that if something's going on in your life, we want to know about it, even if it's going to upset us. And you cannot punish them for what they tell you. Pesha so pesheta, like in the Gemara. I mean, I can't. I would encourage you that if your child tells you something on their own, they don't need a lecture, they need tools to help deal with it, or how to not do it again, or what lessons they should learn from it. If you catch them doing it, then that's a different story. Then one of the things you tell them is, look, it's okay, you can tell me. But if you catch them doing it, there should be consequences, logical, not forever, and in a way that you can try to demonstrate some level of responsibility where there's a logic there's a consequence. And by the way, the best thing is when you write up your agreement in the first place, when you set down the rules, there should be consequences. Okay, I wrote the last thing, I wrote the iPod in Torah, this student who came with his parents, I just thought of it on the spot, and it's my number one recommendation to parents that are trying to get their kids to abide by house rules and keep them. Here's what I did to the kid. The kid and his parents, they were all, they were at my kitchen table. They were going at each other. It was very lively. And then the kid, I gave the kid 5 index cards. Parents, listen to me. This is my number one recommendation for how to set this up. I gave him 5 index cards, and I said, tell me, Yankee, whatever, Yankee, why do you think your parents don't want you to have this device? Write down 5 reasons, 1 on each card. Write down 5 reasons that you think your parents are concerned about, why they don't want you to have it. I mean, you could write that they're ogres or they're horrible people, but that's not going to get you far. So just write what the real issues are. What do you think they're concerned about? And he wrote, and just for fun, I gave the parents 5 cards. I said, why don't you write it down? Let's see if they match. And every time I've done it, at least 4 out of 5, the kids get it. Inappropriate content, I'm going to get bullied, I'm not going to do my homework, I'm going to be a weirdo, whatever things we spoke about, right? So they looked at each other's cards, then I gave him his parents' cards. I said, look, what you wrote doesn't really matter, it's what they think. I gave him the 5 cards. I said, okay, I turned them all over. I said, write a solution to each of them, and you got it. Write a solution. They're afraid of inappropriate content. How are you going to solve your parents' concerns? You come up with a solution. As soon as you have a solution, you go straight to the store. So the kids started writing. Okay, you can do this and that. You're afraid I'm going to not do my homework? So I'm only going to play for 15 minutes when I get home, and then I'm going to do my homework, and then I'll get it back. And I'm afraid. So he wrote, basically, I made him his own jailer. And what got me thinking that way, there's you can look it up online, there's fascinating research into office workplace rules. The research shows that when workers have input into the rules, the way the office rules are made, they're 7 times more likely to follow them than if an authoritarian boss says, here's what you're going to do. So if, let's say, if I decide that, let's say, whatever, I decide that I don't want my yeshiva, back when I was a school principal, I say, look, I don't want the phone to go on an answering machine. Every person who calls the yeshiva, let's say, I say, it should be picked up by the 5th ring. That's what I want. So I could make a chart and rules and hand it out to all the staff, and research shows that, But if I call them together and say, look, I really don't like it that's going on the machines, why don't you figure out a solution, bring it to me, and we'll look it over. Figure out a solution where we should have coverage for most of the day. The research shows that they're 7 times more likely to follow it's logical, right? So instead of just saying, here are the rules, you have your phone, but da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Instead of that, I say, here's the problem, come up with a solution, write it up. And so the kid wrote it up. And then I said, now what are your consequences? You have to come up with consequences that'll make them comfortable enough that you're not going to bust it for nothing. So he says, yeah, take it away for a month, whatever he wrote. They wrote it up, he signed, they signed, and they went to the store. So that's a way to do it where then you wouldn't have that question even. What happens? It's very clear. And I'm telling you, the research shows, and I see, there's almost no resentment when it's done. Rav Volber would say that's the ultimate planting thing. There's input, you go back and forth, the children learn. Does it mean that they never will make a mistake? Of course they'll make mistakes. But at least there's some logic to it, and there's some mahalach, there's an approach that people can get their hands around and make sense out of. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? 1 or 2 more, folks. We got to have a Ma'ariv. Yes?
What generally resonates more with kids? The social, physical, or traffic issues? So parents are concerned about potential physical.
Oh, you mean what are the kids worried about the most?
What are you trying to talk to them? What resonates with them?
The kids, they have no problems. None of them resonate. It's so funny. I'm telling you, part of we forgot what adolescence is. My wife says I'm still a teenager, but I was in chinuch all my life. I have to think like a teenager, which becomes a problem sometimes. But I'm serious. I learned that. But you're not a teenager. You don't work with teenagers. So teenagers think they're going to live forever, and teenagers think they're never going to make mistakes, and teenagers think we're all yesterday's news. That's the way it's been like that since the beginning of time. I believe that if you went into an Egyptian cave, you read the hieroglyphics, it would say, tell those kids to lower the music. This stuff's been going on since the beginning of time. So what happens is that people say, that's not, I'll never forget. It was when I was a kid. I spoke to you about my phone. I don't know, those of you who were here. I gave an example of how I used to supervise my counselors in the Catskills. So one of the summers that I was a head counselor, there was a horrible, horrible car crash, and 2 wonderful kids lost their lives on Route 17 and whatever. And they happened to have been best friends with my staff. I didn't let my guys, driving, whatever it was. So I was in my office. I'll never forget it as long as I lived. It was screaming. there were only pay phones. One kid found out. It was horrible. So my brain works differently than other. I'm not proud of it. It just does. The very first thing I did, as soon as I heard heard what happened, right away I went to the phone and I rented a bus for the funeral. I called the bus company, and I said, please hold the bus for me. I'll pay whatever it takes. I need a bus. Just hold the bus for me because the kids have to go into Brooklyn and back. Why did I do it? Because I knew that the kids are going to start renting cars. Never the kids, right? Instead of thinking, maybe we shouldn't be driving. Teenagers think they're going to live forever. So you show them these things. If you smoke, the lungs, you're cutting out it's for some loser, some 40-year-old loser, with a pot belly. It's not for me. So the discussions that you have with them, you have to help them understand and they won't. But you're the parent, so I'm giving you an extreme example. They understand that there are challenges, but they tend to just feel that they're non-destructible and they're fine, and you're just worrying for nothing. They'll tell you this when they're drinking. They'll tell you this when they're doing other dangerous things. So, but I believe that education helps. Look at seatbelts. when I started driving, very few people wore seatbelts. They had these buzzers, and you had to tie them up behind you, and they had all kinds of systems. Look at today. Nobody gets into a car without driving. I think that one of the things that we're not doing enough of is having public safety campaigns, because Baruch Hashem, many of our communities don't have televisions, and they don't get so. And we were able to shield our children from, a lot of the things in the general population. But you also have to compensate for the public safety stuff. I think a lot of the smoking and the drinking is because we're not doing enough of that stuff. But so the children are not going to, if you're waiting for your children to say, oh, this phone is dangerous, this is a terrible sakana, I'm going to really be careful. So, but you help them understand it. And again, when it becomes practical to them and you can show them, hopefully you have a chance. Okay, but and also another important part of this is, if your goal is that success means my kids are not going to make mistakes, it's going to be a long road. But that's not success. Success is when they at least think about what they've done. If you accept what I said before about the idea of adolescence as a time to learn from our mistakes, the fact that they're talking about a mistake that they made and they sit down with you and you reward them for coming to you by not punishing them for having a discussion. That's when they need. I saw a great bumper sticker. How does it go? I need your love most when I'm most difficult to love. Children talking to parents. They need our guidance most when they're in trouble. So that's why we have to. Last one more. I saw a hand. Yes, last one.
When you say everyone has it, how does that work with?
What would you say? Say what?
Say everyone has it. From my experience, everyone always has everything that kids want. So how do you confirm or
Check it out. Check it out. Check. See if it's true.
And let's say a kid's very good friend has it. You can't say I disagree with those parents.
It's a problem. You could say we have different standards. You could say we have. It's a very. I'm telling you. It's extraordinarily challenging. I'm not saying you should give up, but I'm just saying, where it really hurts is when other parents or other children are not following the school's rules. And it's a huge challenge when schools make rules that aren't real and they really know people aren't listening to. That's even worse. And that's a mess. But this peer pressure idea, as it relates to this, it's a disaster. It's not simple. I'm just saying as a parent, and if your nature is, I don't care what anybody else thinks, you might not, but your wife may feel differently. Some adults, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm a scholar in residence. I was just in a community, I wear a Steinmal. I don't care. You don't like it, don't wear one. I'm like that. Doesn't mean my kids feel this way. Last thing, this might help you relate to this whole, the other kids have it. The year we moved to Muncie was 30 years ago. That was still before the school and the article. I had a nice, beautiful, quiet life. I have a beautiful life now, but it's not quiet. So there were 5. If you saw, I donated 2 Gemara books. That the purpose of those Gemara books are to teach every facet of Gemara to beginner Gemara learners. So let me tell you, one of the most powerful incidents that got me thinking this way was there were 5 guys in Muncie at the time that were in the floor covering business, tiles, carpeting, oilcloth. That's linoleum, whatever. They were all in this business, and there was a show in Atlanta that started Sunday morning, and these guys wanted to be with their families for Shabbos. The last plane out to Atlanta was an hour and 20 minutes after Shabbos. It was really cutting it close. So what they did is they asked me to drive them. One of them was a good friend of mine. So they came to my house for Shalosh Shudas, and the suitcases were in the car before Shabbos. And we made Havdalah, jumped in the car, drove them there, and I dropped them off. So get the picture. There's 6 of us in the car, 5 carpet guys, and Yakov Horowitz. Okay? Now, what were they talking about the whole time? Carpet. They were making carpet jokes. They were making carpet statements. The whole time was all, and they were laughing, howling. This, Joey bought a 26R. I'm not kidding. And everybody would start laughing. I told him not to do it. And I sat there like such a golem. I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know one word. And this went on for 45 minutes till we got to Newark. And as soon as we got to that loop, I turned to them and I said, Rabbi, guys, I want to thank you. My Talmidim will forever thank you Now I know what it's like to sit in a classroom and not know what Rebbe's talking about because he forgot to translate every single word and thought I knew things that I didn't. I said, if this is what it's like for my students, when I'm saying, Iboyelahu, or some, Machnashta de Beidari, 50 times or 100 times in a lesson, afterwards I started listening to myself. And I said, I'm saying these things 100 times, and if a kid is embarrassed to ask the next kid, what does it mean? Like, it's carpet jokes to him. So it was that's how I started thinking along the lines that got me to do that book. So I'm saying, if you're sitting in a car, if you're in a group, you don't realize, parents don't realize what kids do. Guys, there's no environment we're in that we spend 10 hours a day, 5 days a week with the same people. If you don't like your friends, you don't go to the houses. Well, you tell your wife, I'm not sitting with that couple anymore. You have control over things. Maybe at work you don't. But our kids, they're stuck 50, 60 hours a week stuck with these same people. So if they're making fun of them, there's no place to go. So if everybody's talking about an app and a game and a this and a this, and you're saying, oh, yeah, Michael and Dovid, it's a problem. So again, I'm not saying you should roll over, but don't underestimate how powerful it is. Good luck, guys. Stay spunky. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. Thank you. Good night.